Welcome to the Startup Grind. It's my great pleasure to introduce Daniel Lewin. Daniel received a degree in politics from Princeton University. He had stints at Sony. He was an early employee at Apple, worked on the Macintosh. He worked in the university group. He was one of 6 low-level, not senior employees that left Apple to start NeXT. And he had, following NeXT, had a number of roles, including being a CEO and being an advisor and an angel investor, supporter of startups. And in 2001, he joined Microsoft, where he has headed up their entire startup division, and we're going to hear all about that story, including BizSpark from 2001 to today. Let's give a big Startup Grind welcome for Daniel Lewin. Here we go.
Well, you didn't tell me about that. But I'm glad you did. That's all.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Do we call this the house that Daniel built, or is this not? It
Well,
predates you a little bit, but
yeah, it's one of the rooms.
We like to start Startup Grind by just getting to know you a little bit. Tell us where you grew up. Tell us about your parents, what your dad did for work.
Oh, all right. Well, I grew up in a town between Buffalo and Niagara Falls, New York, so right in between on the northern
Tech
side.
capital of the world.
Yeah, the tech capital of the world. A lot of snow capital, snow belt. And sort of an atypical sort of family, but a reasonable and nice community. The village was called Green Acres, for those of you who are old enough to know about the TV show.
Same place?
Same place, yeah.
Wow.
And just like the TV show. And my father didn't finish the 8th grade, but was in the Marine Corps and got out and did various things. I wouldn't call him an entrepreneur, but he was employed in various and different areas, from pounding nails and scrap metal to professional wrestling later in his life. So he was some of the original programming for live TV.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you? I mean, were you kind of born an entrepreneur? Were you doing entrepreneurial things growing up? Was it something that...
The first thing that I did that was in and around this was raising tropical fish. And I had a bit of a green thumb in breeding fish. And we traded our ability to raise fish for the hardware, the tanks. And so we never paid for the tanks. We just swapped the fish and then eventually built it into an ongoing business.
Wow.
Which my father retired on and from. And
You started that when you were how old?
12.
Wow. You and your dad, or were there other people involved? Or?
No, just me and my dad. And so we built all the racks. We had all the stuff in the house. And then eventually started importing things as well, because there was more margin in that.
These were legal fish, I guess, right?
Yeah, they were legal fish, but we had, piranha, all the stuff that people wanted that was crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so you also are you're a very accomplished swimmer. You started
I did swim. I swam as a kid and competitively, and it was a very important asset, if you will, in the sense that it helped me get out of the place where I was, and I ended up, it's a little bit like fish. If you want to swim with fast fish, you have to go places where there are faster fish to learn how to swim faster. So I went lots of places to do that, and met a lot of people when I was in my teenage years, and then eventually it was helpful in going to Princeton. They don't give athletic scholarships, but it's a token that they'll look at, and so that, I was a reasonable student, but that was a lucky thing for me to be able to move fast in the water. That's right. I still do that for fun, but.
When you were headed to Princeton, what were your plans? What did you think you would do? What did you plan to do?
Well, like many people probably in the room as well, I was good at math, but when I showed up there, I realized I wasn't a mathematician within about 30 seconds. And so I was more in line to thinking about law school and thinking about being a lawyer. And this was, in the early 70s. I lost the mic. In the early 70s, and there was a war going on and things like that. And I didn't think by the time I was graduating that I wanted to be part of the system. So I chose not to be a lawyer. And I lost a bet, and I ended up coming here to Palo Alto, and I haven't left.
Well, tell us about that. What bet did you lose? How did you get out here?
So this is a family thing, and it was, what are you going to do? You've got this degree, and it was from the politics department, but my advisor was much more tuned to politics as defined as relationships between or among people, and so looking at systems and organizational dynamics and things of that ilk. I studied a little bit about, remember the era, sort of Bob Dylan, the 1960s, classical charismatic leadership theory, crowds, working dynamics, and things like that. My brother-in-law's brother was there, and we were playing pool. I was pretty good at it, sign of misspent youth. And I kept losing. We were drinking, and to get even, the deal was I couldn't afford to bet anymore. He gave me double or nothing until I was way in debt. I had no money and lots of debt. And to get even, he had purchased a potbelly stove in the rural part of Western New York, and he said, if you get this to Palo Alto and you come with it, we're even. So I put it on top of the car and drove to California.
Wow.
That was in September of 1976.
Wow.
And so I ended up here. The first people I met, just to continue on that vein, it was in Los Altos Hills. It was a house being built. And the two people that were the co-owners of the house where I was spending my evening hours meeting with people it's a large community house. Again, think of the times, it's 1976. And one of them was roommates with Jimmy Trabig and the guys that were founding Tandem at the time.
Wow.
And he runs the Kestrel Institute, which is a crypto institute for the NSA, so he's a pretty smart guy. And then the other person was a woman who was working on the protocols with Larry Roberts for the BitNet, which was the internet. And so I met these people then, and my eyes opened. Yeah.
And so you take a job at Sony?
Took a job at Sony. Long story short, there is it's always better to be lucky than good. I mean, my college roommate's family moved out here when we were in school, so he never lived here, and he came out after graduation and got this job working at Sony. But he really wanted to work for IBM. And so about 6 weeks into the job, he got a job working at IBM, and so he felt bad about that and said, you got to come to work with me today, and I did. And what he did is he went in and said, I got bad news and I got good news. The bad news is I quit. The good news is I got this friend who's Gillette like me. We were roommates in college, and I think you should hire him. So I talked to the guy, and he hired me on the spot. And so I went to work, and then about 2 or 3 weeks later, Steve and Steve left the garage and moved into the office next door to mine in Cupertino, which is where I met the Apple folks when they left the garage and rented their first 600 square feet. So absolute serendipity, and so be it.
But you stayed there for 4 years, right? Or 3 or 4 years?
I did. Sony, how many people know what a standard cassette is? Right, it was a radical invention at that moment in time, and the reason was that the tape ran at a constant speed across the head. That was an invention, a patented invention. Sony made a royalty on every one of those cassettes, regardless of who made them, because of that. And that was the trick for microcomputers storing data, tape, right? Nobody had read, write, erase, random access stuff at the time. And so Sony was in storage, if you will, and that's kind of how I entered the business. There were a ton of startups in and around the storage industry, the most interesting of which had spun out of Xerox, a company called Shugart. Some people, I think, probably know about Shugart or Allen, the companies that he built over the years. And that was the trick for Apple, beyond talent and an incredible board and investors and all of that, but they got exclusive access to Shugart's capacity for read, write, random access drives. And that was pre-IPO mezzanine financing where Xerox bought in, and in exchange for that, Steve got a ticket to go look at Park, and see what was going on there, and then access to the drive capacity. And Sony had a Winchester hard drive at the time, and the 3.5-inch floppy was one of my products, which I took to Apple, and that's when I ended up at Apple, was with the 3.5-inch floppy, and then we sold Apple's disk drive business to Sony later on, so that was part of how I ended up in the company.
When you first met Steve and Steve, was it clear that this was going to be successful?
No.
I mean, were there glimmers of potential? Was it, hey, here to...
Well, there was something going on. There's no question about that. But there were 50 companies in the Valley doing microcomputers. Krememco, and I mean, I can't even remember the names, but there were 50 companies for sure. Certainly in the 77, this is early part of 77 when I actually went to work, and loans came due. And so it wasn't really clear. But by 78 or 9, it was getting clearer. And then, of course, in December of 80, Apple went public with the largest IPO since Ford. And it was then very obvious that they were going to be the front runner for sure.
Yeah. So what finally led to you in 81? What finally led to you leaving Sony and then going to work with them?
Well, the 3.5-inch floppy.
It did, yeah.
Yeah, Steve called one day, Jobs, and said, the day that hit the press, and said, I want to see that. And I went over and we talked for a little while, and he asked me if I'd ever thought about working for Apple, and I said, and I was actually interested in several companies at the time that had mostly culturally driven. Tandem was an incredibly interesting company from a culture perspective, and Rome as well, sort of pre-IBM buyout, et cetera, had really wonderful cultures, and Apple clearly was the more approachable of those three, Tandem doing these very high-end nonstop machine architectures, and Rome in the telecommunications industry, which was nascent for sure, given the AT&T monopoly at the time. So Apple was certainly the most approachable of those, and but my answer then, which would be typical to what I would say now, is that I really don't know very much about microcomputers. Because it's always better to be clear about what you don't know, I think, and then people like to help you. And in that instance, Steve was like, "That's great. We have lots of people who know lots about that." I had turned down a job offer to go to work for Computer Vision at the time, which was a big CAD company. They were $750,000 machines. And I was interested in graphics, very interested in graphics and in learning, because education had been such an important thing for me personally. And as a result, I talked about that. And little did I know that in the back room they had this LISA project, which was the idea from Park that manifested itself in the end in the Macintosh. But he said, and I was talking about those things. He said, well, what we need is help in distribution. Because Apple at the time was working through distributors that had exclusive rights, and there was a whole evolutionary process. And I knew a fair amount about channels, because Sony was really good with channels.
Yeah.
That was the key.
And that's
so
where
it
you
was a
started.
channel thing. Yeah, the guy that hired me in, Joe Roebuck, ever grateful to Joe, ended up leaving Apple soon thereafter and going to work at Sun when they had 7 sales reps and $7 million in sales. And he ran sales and services through the peak of the bubble and the highest penny of their share price, and then retired. So he
did decent.
He was brilliant, yeah. And so he was very, very helpful to me, but Steve really was the ticket. He took my card and gave it to Joe, and Joe called me, and we hit it off. We happened to be from the same hometown, and we hit it off. So again, luck is always good.
So you did the channel marketing. What else did you do? You were there through 85. So
that's right. So I looked after what was going on in the Lisa division and built a way for the company to show off its products and services, mostly products at the time, to the Fortune 500, Global 500 style companies. So I built an executive briefing facility, a room, not unlike this, different room, but and I wore a suit and
This is the first Apple retail store, right?
No, it wasn't a retail store. It was how are we going to sell to the Fortune 500 through the dealer network, hiring direct salespeople who would actually close the deal. We do fulfillment through the dealers. It was the channel evolution. And so I had, again, good fortune in that I set this thing up, and I must have been, whatever, I was in my mid-20s or whatever, so I'm wearing a suit. And these very accomplished salespeople that we hired were corralling, must be the CEO, must be an officer of the corporation, but if not the CEO, they couldn't come. So I ran 90 executive briefing programs over about a 12-month period with Fortune 500 CEOs in the room.
On your own, or is this?
Well, I ran the whole day, and I had people coming in and out over the course of the day to talk to them about various facets of the technology, including SQL and Oracle, which was a $10 million company, and we were going to work with Oracle for SQL databases, and what we were going to be doing relative to networking, and this is pre-laser printer and all this other kind of stuff. So, but it was, I got good fortune to be in front of these kinds of people really early in my professional life.
And are those relationships that you maintain that you have?
Not really at this stage, but for a long time it was very valuable. But the skill, if you will, was helpful. And so that was the first thing I did. And then with that, we were showing things off to.
How big a business was that?
Apple was about a $100 million business at the time.
Yeah.
How many, Mary Kay Cosmetics, people familiar?
Huge
the
fan.
Bumblebee, the whole thing, and the pink Cadillacs and the whole bit. So we brought Mary Kay in, and they were a very early, in fact, one of the first largest, biggest customers of the Xerox Star, which was the first commercial implementation of what Xerox and others, the Alto and all the bitmap stuff. And so they, through their cosmetic salesperson network, wanted to have a similar kind of product. So Macintoshes were ideally suited for them to want to have their reps, and then put the inventory back into the corporate system. So it's within that environment that Steve came in, because he had just commandeered the Mac project away from Jeff Raskin and wanted to make sure that Mac was discussed with these folks. So he came in and then he said, you really should quit this and come to work for us over in the Mac group, which I did. And when we finished the briefing stuff.
That's in 1984, right? Into
yeah, that's probably 82, early 82, roughly. We did that.
82, and then you go work in the Macintosh group up until
a couple months, 4 or 5 months after we launched. I went over into the sales and marketing side of the house and built out the education, sales and marketing piece of the business. Steve had been fired, if you will, and the divisions had changed. We sort of changed the operating model, and it was a little more natural for me to go over into the sales and marketing side of the house. Bill Campbell, most people know who Bill is, was running stuff at the time, so I went to work over there, and again, that was good. But while in the division, I ran around and set up a university consortia. I had the idea that, especially working on the Lisa stuff and showing it off to these Fortune 500 companies, I asked the basic question of, okay, the people who invented this stuff would probably like to buy some of these. What do you think? And the division said, no, we're just going to sell out in the Fortune 500. We don't want to talk to these academicians or researchers. Most people have the belief that they don't have money in those markets. There's a huge amount of money in those markets. And guess what? They like stuff like that. So I took the time on my own to show it off to people from Stanford and Carnegie Mellon and Brown and Utah and a few of the folks that were really big in graphics. Most people, Andy Van Dam at Brown, who wrote a lot of textbooks on that stuff. So I showed them the Lisa, and then when it came time to start showing off the Mac, I went and took the Mac around the country and showed it to those folks and set up a consortia by which we sort of deployed lots of Macintoshes.
Yeah, and you're really credited for basically setting that whole thing up and executing it, and that led into kind of what was to come with NeXT, right? Because it was. So tell us. So Steve Jobs gets thrown out of the company, and then there's this huge reorg within Apple. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
Your kind of your role.
I go to the sales and marketing side of the house, the division. Jean-Louis Cassé runs the division. They're building product and putting it in a box and then giving it to the marketers. And I was really a marketer on the opportunity side, if you will. And so Steve went away, and then I got a phone call from him in
September '85.
September of '85. On a Tuesday, and I went over to his house, and we talked for a few hours, walked around, and he said he was going to go start a company, and I had a young family, and I was saying, okay, tell me more, and so I listened. And it was all interesting, but I didn't know who was going to run software, and by then I concluded that software was the magic, and hardware's nice because software's got to run on something, but software was going to matter.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't closed on that at the time, and so we agreed to talk again later in the week when he thought he would close on that, and I traveled over the weekend, whatever, and early into the next week. And then when we talked, he let me know that Bud Tribble was going to come, and Bud's the best. So the following Thursday, from the Tuesday that I talked to him, I went in and they had a board meeting, and Steve went in and told the board what he was going to do. He resigned from the board, and they didn't want to accept it, and most of this has been written. And so the next morning, I left the building that day, and we got together that night, and kind of, one for all for one, we're going to go start this company. And the next morning, we went in, and Apple walked us out and sued us.
Yeah. Well, so, and there's there's kind of 2 points here that are very interesting. First of all, you're right, it has been written about. Walter Isaacson wrote about it in his book about Steve Jobs. One of the things that he says about you, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I haven't read the book.
You've
I'm
never
sorry.
read it.
No, I haven't.
Well, he says.
And I actually didn't sit down with Walter either. I talked on the phone for about 20 minutes to him, but I didn't.
Well, it's at one point he's referring to you. He's talking about this group of 6 people that are leaving, and he says basically you were the missing piece. These other people had agreed to do it. They're like, who's going to run marketing? And Steve Jobs was like, Dan Lewin, he's the guy. He's got to do it. And he refers to you as this guy that has chiseled good looks of Clark Kent and a Princeton polish.
There you go. Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks.
That's awesome. And but he describes this story. I wonder if you could just tell it with Bill Campbell, where he says that Bill Campbell was furious. He was so funny because he wasn't really concerned about the other team members, but he was so angry that you were leaving. And he says that he stormed out of the meeting and had the secretary call you. Do you remember? You must remember this. Is this true, or you maybe don't want to tell? Do you want?
No, he called me up. I was at home. I was in the shower, and he was insistent. So I got out of the shower and talked to him, and he wanted to know if I was going, and I said yes. Well, actually, I said I'm coming in to talk about that, and he said I need to know now, and I said, well, if you need to know now, then yeah, I'm going. And he said okay, and that's what I needed to know.
And that was it.
And that was it. So I still have a great rapport with Bill. I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks, actually. And I worked for him later on. He came to Go, and I worked at Go, and he was the CEO there. And I was there about a year before he came, but he's a terrific guy.
Well, it was great. I mean, I thought it was a great credit to you. It was a compliment to you of that, hey, here was this, you were this piece that they needed with this amazing team. And tell us, so Apple sues you. How scary is that? And I think startups go through this all the time. So,
Sure.
Totally different world, right? You're now this company with $7 million from Steve Jobs, who's put into this company, 6 people in blue jeans.
Right.
How does that feel? How do you deal with it?
Well, we didn't have anything to hide by any means. It was just us and some ideas. We had nothing written down. None of us were insiders. We weren't officers of the company. So, it was one of those things that it was a little bit of a nuisance, but we had good lawyers, and I think at the end of the day, it lingered for several months, and then eventually we settled, and I was the last piece of the. There's case law about the milkman and the bread man, and the bread man leaves the bread company and starts his own bread company, and then he goes around and he starts delivering bread to restaurants, right? Because that's how restaurants buy bread. And they sue him and say, you can't do that, that's our customer list. And he goes, well, I just went to the Yellow Pages and looked up restaurants, and so what are you going to do? And you didn't take the list, it's in the Yellow Pages. And then the milkman, when he leaves because people used to deliver milk to homes, and the milkman, clearly must have taken the list because you got to know who wants milk delivered to their front door, right? You can't go to the Yellow Pages and find that out. So they wanted to know if I was the bread man or the milkman, right? And So
I'm assuming you
I was
were
the
the
bread
man.
and that was pretty clear, because what I did when I left is I just called Charlie Warlick, who was the head of computing at UT Austin, and I said, Charlie, will you send me that book, which the university community publishes about themselves, about every CIO, every director, every academic computing center, how many computers they have, what are they, the whole thing. They just publish it about themselves. And he said, sure. So he sent me a copy of the book, and I had the book. I didn't, it was nothing to take.
Wow.
And other than that, it was just relationships with people and a and a network effect, right? I mean, the university community is amazing, and what they do, and some of the trick with the Macintosh and the universities was that Apple. I broke how we did distribution. I changed the distribution model for the company, which was a strategy that was Steve's strategy that I was crafting and implementing to be what Dell became, which was direct to the end user. And we were going to do that early on. And the university community was the foray into that. And DEC and IBM, who were the primary competitors at scale in that market, wouldn't let the university customer move the VAXs or whatever machines they had, the Rainbows eventually, but the big machines that were mostly used in the university community, you couldn't move it from one office to another without hiring the DEC systems engineer or whatever to come and do that for $200 an hour. And the university folks kind of said, hey, we built this stuff. We can move it around on our own and plug it in. We're okay with this. And so I just went to them and said, how do you want to do business with us? And then I wrote a contract that way, under the terms that they wanted to do business with us. And I went to Apple and said, we have to do this, or and it was.
And in terms of the original NeXT product vision, how true did you guys stay to it? Did that come over time?
It got totally out of control. So we didn't really stay that true to the vision, and that was the initial failure, if you will, of the first instance of the NeXT machine. It was supposed to be a $3,000 machine. Effectively came out at $10,000, if you will, and so we grossed it up with in terms of what you might have had as an effective retail price. And so it was, it was religiously focused on read-write erasable, MO drives that were way too slow, and so no, it went wild. But the software lasted, and that's what's running everything today for the most part.
And you went from school to school, and again, this has been written about, but you approached Mitch Kapoor. There's a story about that where you guys went to him, and is that right? And
well, I don't recall Mitch being in the cycle. Maybe he was, but we did go, to all the big software houses.
Yeah.
Including Microsoft back then, and talk about what we were building and getting apps, if you will. And so we went to Lotus, and Jim Manzi was running Lotus. And Ray Ozzie was running Iris Associates at the time. This is before Notes launched. And Iris was Ray's company out of Software Garden when he left. And Lotus eventually bought Iris and Ray, and obviously Notes was their swan song in their sale to IBM. But so we met with Ray and Jim and a small team inside of Lotus. Ed Belove was running it to build, if you will, a spreadsheet. And Ray wanted to actually implement Notes in the NeXT architecture, and that wasn't high on Steve's list at the time, so we didn't do it. Might have been a good play for us. But Ashton Tate, WordPerfect, all the software companies in that day were very interested and very supportive. We did not earn Microsoft support to build applications for the company. But it was, a beautiful architecture, and the hardware, I think, was just, misfit the first shot out. It was elegant and beautiful, but, had a wonderful paint job. The paint job cost more than what the bill of materials was supposed to be for the entire cube. Just to give you an idea.
True?
To give you an idea of
Wow.
the scale of the perfection of the paint was hard to imagine. Ross Perot helped us with that. He had just been booted out of GM and was an investor, and so our guys flew off to General Motors to learn how to put paint on magnesium.
Wow. So Steve put in the first $7 million, and then Ross Perot came in, put in $20 million.
Right, Ross Perot and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon put money in, Carnegie Mellon and Stanford, maybe 600,000+ each, and Ross put in 20, and I think Steve put in 5.
Yeah.
And so we raised 26 million or so at 100 million pre-money valuation, and then we did one more round of financing with Canon coming in, investing 100 at 500 million pre, so that was, I think, the financing history. There were a few other deals.
Canon is in.
Canon is in the laser printer camera company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They were very thankful to Steve for the work on the laser printer early on, and so they had done very, very well on that business. And all the suppliers were incredibly generous to us at NeXT, from Motorola, which is the initial processors, to the memory guys, Hitachi, I think we got the memory from, and I mean, all the connectors guys from AMP, they all were very generous in terms of terms and everything.
And is that based on because of these
It was all
relationships?
Steve. It was all Steve. It was all Steve, and his, his brilliance on supply chain, which Tim Cook clearly was the person at Apple who manifested Steve's vision, and that's an absolute area of brilliance, and the fact that many of these companies, either ignored Apple and didn't participate in the success along the way, or were very successful as a result of working with Apple. So in either case, people were sort of saying, hey, can we work with you?
Yeah. 2 more questions on this, and then
Sure.
I want to talk about how you got to Microsoft.
Sure.
The first is you end up leaving 5 years after the company is founded.
Mm-hmm.
This was as much your baby as anyone else.
Sure.
How difficult was that decision for you?
Very hard. Very difficult decision. I needed to make it. I did make it. I had been fired, but not there. And that's a good lesson, I think. If you haven't been fired, you haven't been trying hard. but
Sounds like
but I
something
did
your
quit,
parents tell you.
and I just, more than half the company worked for me at the time, and yeah, so I did feel like it was, even though I was a small shareholder relative to Steve, owned more than half the company, and I just didn't. We've been fighting for a long time about certain things that it just wasn't. It's like you got to stop at some point.
Yeah.
So I went to work. It was a Kleiner-backed business. Both John and Vinod was on the board as well. That's where I met Vinod. Actually, I met Vinod when he was his son, now that I think about it. But John and Vinod were both on the board. It was before Vinod went to Kleiner, and it was a company called Go that was doing mobile and pen-based stuff, which we're all living and dreaming with today. It's fantastic. And so those early ideas were very intoxicating. And Mitch Caper was involved there. He was one of the principals behind things at Go. Jerry Kaplan was the guy who was a principal scientist at Lotus and friends with Mitch, and so it was Mitch's company, if you will, that he and Jerry had birthed. So that's when then I went over there, and that's when I kind of got more into more traditional venture-backed things, considering NeXT, not, yes, we were financed, but not traditionally, if you will.
So let's jump ahead if we can to 2001.
Sure.
And you're kind of by design, you haven't really latched on to anything. You're kind of
taking a little
free
time
agent.
off, yeah.
And you listened to this talk by Steve Ballmer. Tell us kind of how it unfolded, how you end up here at Microsoft.
So yeah, I was taking some time off, and purposefully I didn't find the bubble that fascinating. It seemed it was very irrational for me, and so it got a little goofy in 2000, and I was done with the startup that I was working on, had a falling out with the founders, and so I was running it, and anyway, so long story short, I read Steve's speech. Ballmer gave a speech in June of 2000, which was a precursor to this whole world of web-based services, and now as a company, our mission for devices and services. And it was a very compelling speech. It was 6 months old when I read it, because I was off the network and not really paying attention. And I was helping a friend at Stanford who's a professor, who's a serial entrepreneur. And in doing some research on the web, I found this speech. And so I sent Steve an email. He was describing the .NET framework, so distributed object framework, which is a lot like NeXT, but a little more modern. and a commitment to cloud-based services and interoperability.
Yeah.
And so my thought is, all right, Microsoft had done extraordinarily well in the client-server era, and the application power came from content-less applications where people put stuff into the word processor, into the database, into the blank drawing page. And if that data was going to get set free using internet standards, that the world of interoperability would surface, which would be fundamental to breaking down the silos and all the craziness that was going on around these platform wars. And the web would actually materialize because Microsoft had such a broad footprint. And my curiosity on all of this and view of the world had been built by two things in 1982 that I experienced. One was at Dartmouth College with a Macintosh about 2 years before we launched it. They invented time sharing there, and they invented the basic programming language there. And when they decided to buy Macintoshes, and I asked them why, this is way before we finished them or introduced them, they said, oh, this is going to be an intelligent graphics terminal to put at the edge of our network. And I went, what network? There's no network built into this thing. And they said, oh, you have an RS-422 chip in there. And I said, yeah. And they said, we're just going to write our own. So the precursor to AppleTalk was the protocols that the guys at Dartmouth wrote to connect it into their phone jacks so that every kid on the campus could get to the computer center and play Star Wars online, which they were doing in 1984 within minutes of these machines being out of a box. And then the guys at Stanford had built their own time-sharing system. It was called LOTS. Some people will probably nod. These DEC 20s, it was a low overhead time-sharing system that ran everything in the Stanford community. And they had to get these Macintoshes onto that network. Cisco, right? So the people built a bridge, and then Cisco spun out of Stanford. So that was one of the motivators for a lot of that stuff back then. So for me, networking devices at the edge in '82 was like, okay, this is where the world's going. And I wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that eventually we'd carry these things in our pockets, and eventually our body movement's going to generate power, and it's all, you can see it, right? So that had been in my mental model for a long time, especially hanging around with smart people in the university community. So Steve's speech motivated me to send him a note, and he happened to be online, and he responded. And
Immediately.
Immediately.
Can I just ask you, for those of us that don't email him that often,
it's unbelievable.
How does one just get Steve Ballmer's email? Did you knew him from 25 years earlier?
Well, I met Steve and Bill. The Apple II, so a lot of people nodding along on this Apple stuff, I can tell. The Apple II boot ROM was Microsoft Basic, right? And so part of the stuff along the way, when we were building the Mac, were a lot of trades in and around what we were going to do, what Microsoft was going to do, before there were issues about collusion or market position, because it was, a bunch of guys, people building stuff that were, more than hobbies now. But so Bill and Steve were part of all that. Jeff Rakes had worked at Apple and then gone to Microsoft, so it was a relatively small community.
Yeah.
And I'm in the same age bracket within 12 months or so of all these guys, and so so we knew each other. And so Steve was online, and I said, if you're serious about this distributed object framework and you're serious about web services, I'm not going to leave the valley, but if I think the venture community will find it very interesting to engage with Microsoft, because when you go beyond collapsing to the office automation desktop clients and servers, and you go to distributed computing to the edge of the network, there's a lot of room in there, and there's a lot of opportunity that no one company will ever do. And this is clearly, pre-Google having a business model, or Mark Zuckerberg leaving 9th grade or 7th grade. So, think about it. It wasn't that long ago, but it was a long time ago. And so the idea of sort of three-dimensional computing rather than client-server, but real N-tier computing, and the data being free, and Microsoft having a great programming model and a lot of loyal developers, is like, this could be a fascinating transition to help the company grow from client-server to this new world of whatever it's going to be, because that was going to be, and now it's devices and services, which is where we sit.
So how do you even begin something like that? So you joined Microsoft in 2001. Yep. You're like, it's trying to steer this. I don't even know. Ship doesn't even describe it. It's like trying to move Pangea or something, right?
That's a big, yeah.
How do you? Where does someone even begin in an organization like this to?
Well, I had the good sponsorship, right? That helps when, you can't typically, if you can write algorithms, you can do anything, right? But I can't. So I had a position in the company to figure out how to engage all the smart people who don't work at Microsoft and the money behind them to think about working with us. And so the only way to do that would be to do an assessment of the gap analysis about what we're doing and what we're not doing, right? Because how can you have an honest conversation with someone about what they want to invest in if you can't say, it looks interesting, but no, we don't have a word processor in the cloud, but you can imagine someday that we might want to do that, and we have some skills in that area. So that's an obvious answer. But then there's a whole bunch of other areas where there's gaps: security, systems management, all kinds of other things that the company wasn't doing. So when I started, I had Steve's support to kind of look across the company and understand what was going on, and to do that mapping, which I did, and I used Visio. You use the tools, draw pictures, and you go, okay, the SQL guys are doing this. And you have to organize around your thinking around the way the company does business and makes money, right? So you have to do that diagnostic. And so I had the flexibility to do that. So we went across the entire organization, and then I went in and sat down and said, okay, here's my view. Because I asked that question, who's done this? Nobody's done this. Everybody's just busy doing what they're doing for their day job. And I said, well, okay, well, I'm going to go do that. So I did that. And then I sat down with Steve and I said, okay, here's what I see. And he had a recommendation for how I approach it. And I thanked him for his recommendation.
You Heisman him, or?
No, I just thanked him. And I said, with all deference to your role as CEO, I don't think that'll work.
Yeah.
But sure, I'll follow your lead. And so I did, and that transpired, and nothing really happened. And so then when I saw him a little while later, he said, so how's it going, And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, how's everybody responding? And I said, they're not. And he said, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. So I had already started the process to kind of go bottoms up. And then I picked up a team. This took me about a year plus, a big company, great flexibility, incredible generous opportunity for me to kind of comb across the company and look at this, including the research organization, which has almost 1,000 PhDs. So it's the world's largest computer science department. And then there's a bunch of MDs and anthropologists as well. But it's an amazing organization. So it's I think, an incredible company in that regard. So we then took a small team of people and started to look at where venture money was relative to what we cared about, and did that triangulation. And so that took a few years to systematically go through those things over time. And then I'd say about 4 or 5 years into things, we met in the middle. And so the top-down and the bottoms-up push happened. And now it's a systemic and ongoing operating principle for the company that works. And then we built our cloud architecture, just to fast forward, Azure. And then we set up a series of programs to feed and encourage and engage the entrepreneur community to work with us under the premise that if you bet on something that we care about, we will be helpful to you in the market. There's lots of ways to get software these days. Sometimes it doesn't cost anything. In our case, it doesn't either. But it used to be that you'd have to figure out where to buy it and how to buy it. Now you can use it for no charge for 3 years. So we're kind of on par, and then eventually either you run it yourself,
right,
or you pay somebody to run it for you, which we'll be happy to do. And we'll help you in the market, which is a competitive advantage, I think, for the way we do business as opposed to, say, pure open source.
So the idea of BizSpark, if I'm understanding correctly, it's basically bridging all of these Microsoft products and services to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person startup, and then scaling from there, giving them access to it when they probably can't afford it.
That's right.
So that's right. If you don't give them access to it, they're going to either pirate it or they're going to use something else.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you're less than 5 years old, less than $1 million in revenue, some local variations apply, and private. Those are the 3 criteria. Welcome to the world, download what you want, plug into the Azure cloud, get a reasonable amount of cloud compute and storage. If you need more, we will know about it. You can ask, and depending upon, we typically give. And so it's and it's globally. You said something that's very important. The company has terrific market share in China, but we have a collections problem, right? So in certain parts of the world, legitimizing use is an important thing because you'd rather have share, and then if you give people a way to successfully on-ramp, then that's a good thing. And so 4 years in, we're on our way to about 100,000 companies that have joined, 50+ thousand that are active at any moment in time because people graduate. And that seems to be a reasonable stasis. The community that we engaged to make that happen are what we call network partners, people that care, entrepreneurs, angel investors, tech transfer offices and universities. So all around the world we have well over 1,000 other parties that care about entrepreneurs and job creation in their local markets, and we give them the right to point people to these servers and MSDN and get what they need.
The thing about BizSpark to me that's always been interesting and I think well done is when I left EA, BizSpark was one of the first things that I saw coming out of EA. I saw it on Mashables,
Yep.
you know,
They've been great for us.
Monday program, and you know all these different things, and you have continued to do that. Even just this week, I was looking at a few different things, and there's BizSpark. I mean, I think, and I think that consistency, which you rarely see, is it's great for you guys, but it's a great strategy. I mean, you know, it's you're here, you're not going anywhere, or it doesn't seem like you're going anywhere. So you know, startups can invest, startups can get involved.
Sure. Well, again, I'm a distribution guy at the end of the day. So to me, it was a challenge for the company. You know, who would know? Where do you go to get Microsoft software? I mean, you might know to go to Fry's or go whatever. You can go buy some stuff. But do you really want to pay retail? You know, it's like, so in the modern world, you know, go back 3-4 years, where do you go? And so our sense was we need to create a safe place, a trusted place within which you can do business with us on market terms. And for entrepreneurs, market terms are, I'm going to go to the web and download some stuff and get going. And that's market terms. And so we had to meet market terms. In the beginning, you know, there was concern about us giving stuff away. And so the very first launch of the program, we had a $100 price tag on the program, but you only paid when you left. There was no charge to get in. And it's like because they were told you have to have a price. And I said, okay. I remember going to Japan and not paying an airport tax to get in, but I remember having to pay the airport tax to leave the country because it wasn't engineered into the exit flight. So I had to go and buy a little ticket. I said, so how about when they leave? And by the time, you know, so it was just, there has to be a better way than to get somebody's money up front.
Talk to us about if I have a company, I have a startup, and I want to work with Microsoft, or I want to position my company to get acquired by Microsoft. What do I need to do what are some of the steps, what are some of the checklists that I need to do to just even be in the realm of possibility?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of publicly available information about what we're doing. We're a big public company, and you can go look online and see what we're doing. And if you understand, you know, where the new parade is, you know, where are we going, and where do we need help? Big companies need help too, right? And so you have to be doing something that's in our vested interest that we would care about. And I can give you an example of you know, early on in the history of the SharePoint server business. There were lots of companies that we wanted to do business with, and they were very busy doing other things, whether they were startups or not. But let's just say they were startups, for example. And we had a lot of energy to help make those things happen and to help companies plug in.
Yeah.
And then 18 months later, 24 months later, 30 months later, this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and they have a very large ecosystem. So we're less able, given the scale of our business, to help intimately with a young one-off company. So today, we need applications, right? And we have distribution on our clients, right? So we're in the devices business and then in the services business. So pay attention to what we care about. You can do an analysis of where there are gaps. And we buy, if I was to pick an arbitrary number of quote-unquote startups, we buy more than this, but you know, 10 to 20 companies a year has roughly been about the pace. There are probably in the big funnel of startups as we all know them and have been talking about them, there are probably 1,000 a year that we pay pretty close attention to and we can know something meaningful about.
That's just within your group, or which group would that?
That's
or
sort
all
of
everyone?
globally. Because we're a small corporate group, and then this whole thing is syndicated out around the world in the local market. So there are people on the ground in every market.
Sure.
And the developer division that we're in always reports to the GM of the subsidiary. This is always a very high-level position. It's not buried places. If you've ever seen the video of Steve talking about developers or screaming about developers, we are the group that that manifests that.
That's how we
energy.
start every Monday morning.
That's right.
With
We
that
just
video.
scream developers, developers, developers. And so there's a pretty good triage process. We divide the, it's just a scale thing. You divide the globe up into 15 areas, and then things bubble up. And we pay really close attention at that level, and we have a pretty efficient system for understanding what the business units really care about. In the end, when we buy things, any big company is like this. They buy things that are adjacencies typically. They don't buy things that are outside. And it's usually, if it's under, and I say this with all deference to the size and scale of most startups, but also just recognizing the size and scale of Microsoft, when we buy things that are under $250 million purchase price to us, they get tucked into a group. I mean, they literally, they're sort of a tuck-in. That's the way we describe them, because they fit into a group that exists, because there's about 40 big business groups, nearly 20 of them are billion-dollar businesses. They're really big businesses. And so when they buy stuff that's under that size, they kind of tuck it in. Now Yammer, everybody knows Yammer. Yammer was, over $1 billion. That's a pretty,
Its own division.
That's a group,
Yeah.
right? That's a product group. It's not a division. Skype is a division, right? We spent multi-billion. Skype is a division. So that's kind of the hierarchy of our scale. And so most startups that we end up buying tend to be in the, N being, maybe even single digit if it's a couple of entrepreneurs doing something that fits. And the engineers, it is, it's IQ and technical talent match. Up to 150 million or so is kind of a sweet spot, and those things happen in the business group, product group areas, and they can act reasonably independently.
You've seen thousands of startups, tens of thousands of startups through this program. Well, very quickly, what are some of the critical things that you've seen repeated in successful entrepreneurs? And if it's the normal cliche things, great. But what are the things that you say, got to have this, got to have this, got to have this?
Well, you have to have sort of a singular focus and passion for what you're doing. You really have to. It can't be a job. It has to be something you just believe in. And, I do think that successful entrepreneurs typically have a way of seeing the market, and that can be manifested in an end user set of characteristics, or a broad scale. It depends upon how you look at it. But the other thing that I think, in my experience, entrepreneurs who typically build a more successful business are clear that there are no real well-rounded individuals in the world, but they can build a well-rounded team by understanding individual characteristics and talents and skills. And one of my earlier comments, for what it was worth, is just about knowing what you don't know and being clear that you need to complement your skills with others, because there aren't that many individuals who unto themselves become an interesting and important company. It's a collection of people. And the observation of understanding people's strengths and what their predisposition is and letting them grow in those areas rather than pretending, whether it's the Peter Prince, it's like, okay, got this really great engineer, let's make him or her a manager. All right, is that a good thing to do? Probably not. It just, where are people's passions? What do they naturally, and what's their predisposition? So being very conscious of that. That's the one thing that I have seen in everyone from Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Ballmer and all these. I'm sure Larry Ellison's the same way. I know him a little bit, but not well. But the folks at Sun, when they were building the company out, Scott and Vinod and Bill and those guys, they were really conscious of the team, if you will, the whole thing. And so I think that's a really critical thing.
What about Silicon Valley entrepreneurs versus non-Silicon Valley entrepreneurs versus non-US entrepreneurs? Do you see?
I don't see that much difference in real. There's all kinds of in skill sets. Again, personal observations. My acid test is my acid test. But and I travel around the world a lot. There are incredibly bright people everywhere in the world, and it's pretty easy to see them and to see their vision and their passion when you meet them. And so I think it's if I was to say of all the places I've traveled, there's 10 or 20 places anyway in the world where there's talent as good as anywhere in the world. The challenges they face in their local environments are much different sometimes. So that's tied to the context of the nation state that they live in, the cultural values relative to failure. What does it mean if you fail and you're starting a company and you live in Germany, or whatever? What does that really mean? You're marked for life. I'm making that up, but you know what I mean. There are all those variables about attitudes and regulatory issues and tax issues and how long does it take to incorporate a business, all those kinds of things. So, the Valley, high concentrations of all of the assets are important. And the one thing that the Valley's got that no one will ever replicate is the weather. And do not underestimate the weather.
You've been here for 3 decades. Are these cycles, do they just repeat over and over again?
They do.
Is it the exact same thing? Is it just like, oh my gosh, this is like 98,
it's
oh,
never
this was
gonna
like
stop.
92.
It's never going to stop. I don't know. My experience is obviously microprocessor-centric, starting with storage, if you will, and to where we are today. I do think, being more of a student of history than electrical engineering, if you look at the patterns of these, revolutions, if you will, whether it was manufacturing or transportation or railroads, over the years, these 50-year cycles, if you read history on those things, the microprocessor was an amazing thing. You can't thank Bob Noyce and the rest of all those guys enough for what they did and the opportunity that they gave to everyone. And then the whole ISO stack and the first 20 years of the Valley, just building out all the pieces and the networking and everything, which was fascinating. But we're in a period now where after the bubble burst, I think in sort of 2000-ish, that was natural and it was going to happen. And then, everybody digested for a long period of time, right? Because it's easier to die of indigestion than starvation. People bought way too much. Y2K build-outs, all that stuff was the last time the IT industry had a chance to sell people stuff, because the customers are pretty smart now, so they buy now. They're not being sold. And so now it's this, for a while, after 2001, 2, 3, 4, where people were digesting at scale, now we're into this period of incredible build-out. And it's content-rich, it's location-based, and then I think in the next 5 or 10 years, it's just going to fade into the fabric. And that's when the revolution will really have arrived, right? Because microprocessors, guess what? Who saw The Graduate, the movie The Graduate? Plastics, man. Microprocessors are going plastic. They're building them now. They're going to print them just like it's just incredible. So we move, we burn energy. It's going to get turned into power, right? All these things are going to happen, and we're seeing it now. You're going to wear it. It's going to fade into what you do and how you live every day. Who knows if that's 10 years or 5 years or 15 years, but we're going to see that in our lifetime here. And so I don't think we've come close, given the surface area of people who are on the network, to seeing the end of these cycles. I think we got a lot more. It's going to be different. The disruption is going to be digital disruption, I think, as opposed to technology disruption. It's the digitalization of things being applied to different industries, cross industries. Innovation is about economic boundary lines. They're moving very rapidly among free versus advertising versus this versus that, medical, health, education, all those things are going to be very real. And you're going to talk to Vinod, who's betting on scientists in all those areas, which are fascinating.
I'm asking you 2 more questions, then we'll take any questions from the audience. You maybe spent more time or as much time as anybody was with the young Steve Jobs. Would love to get a real take on either A, what he was really like, or what he was good at, or what he was maybe not good at. What after spending so much time with the guy, what is your end? What's your takeaway from him?
Well, I don't know that I have any definitive statements to offer. I learned an awful lot from him in many ways, like you do from anyone that you spend a lot of time with. Things to do, things not to do. So, there are certainly a lot of those things. But, clearly, Steve was one of the most, maniacally focused people that I've ever met. And, people, you've read all these things about sort of, the reality distortion field, et cetera. I mean, he just pathologically focused. I mean, just believed. And, I got to spend a lot of time with a lot of different people in the research organizations and, Alan Kay and all those folks. And, lots of people see things. I mean, I just gave you this ridiculous speculative point of view about the future. Sure, it'll come true. So does that make me a visionary? No. Whatever. Lots of people could tell you a lot more about the truth on those things than me just saying them, because they're really steeped in the science behind these things. They can tell you when those things will logically occur. And I can follow that conversation. I can't lead it. The thing that Steve was really good at, and I'm thinking out loud about it, is I think he could see, I'm really good at close-up, but when I get to a distance, I need glasses. It's a little different than most people. I think he could see really well at a distance and point things out to really smart people who would tell him that's not possible. And he'd say, no.
I can see it.
I see it. And so if you had the kind of personality that would persevere against that, a lot of people fell off the mountain along the way trying to get there.
Yeah.
But he knew there was a path there. And so he had a pretty good way of figuring those things out and not giving up.
It's fascinating. And he was, I mean, well above average on getting people in the boat to get there. And some died along the way.
That's the talent thing. I mean, Steve, Bill, Ballmer, any Zuckerberg's got to be the same way. I mean, I've met him, but I don't know him really. People. You have to hire the right people, and at the end of the day, that's the job, And so you have to surround yourself with the right people, and then the layers get built. It's really hard. The Romans organized in groups of 100 for a reason, and the world hasn't changed that much since then, even with social networks. How many people can you kind of know at any moment in time and have a reasonable rapport with? Yeah, you can connect with them and you can link with them or know them, but I think when you get into a really large company like that, you have to have disciplines and abilities to process that, and that's hard. It takes an incredible talent.
Daniel Lewin coming out of Princeton next year. If you were, where would he go? What would he do?
Probably be a lawyer. I don't know. I meet a lot of college students. I like.
It's disconcerting.
Right. There's no jobs out there, I heard. But I've been spending a lot of time with college students. We have a very broad initiative. We have this BizSpark program, but we have one called DreamSpark for students all around the world. There's tens of millions of them. And then we have a broad initiative we call USpark about youth enablement and jobs and employment and stuff. That's our broader citizenship agenda. And it's fascinating to me, how talented young people are and how their worldview has changed relative to anything that I could have ever imagined when I was coming out of school. It's just amazing. So I encourage people. You clearly have to understand the technology, which is important, but I think the sort of social consciousness is pretty important.
Let's give Daniel a big, huge round of applause. Do you have any questions? And I can just walk the mic out. Anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Nathan Shore. I think you're a great person to ask this question. You can't ask this for everybody because you've had this wide focus going back to the 30 years. What do you see that's left out there? I mean, in the sense of Google and Bing, no one is going to likely to come up with a new way of doing search. I mean, not likely. Facebook, social networking is pretty much in the bag to a large degree. Instagram with photos and so on. Do you have some sense of what's left? Or there's some area that, a blue ocean that we haven't yet tapped into that you might see coming up in the near future?
I am not the best person to answer that. I have, different points of view about where the opportunities exist. I think there's immense opportunity that are really big scale opportunities that, if I knew, maybe I'd go do that. I don't know. Probably not. I really do like what I'm doing a lot. But there's a lot of stuff that's, even just in the Valley, if you just pick stuff that's going on right now, like Pinterest, pretty interesting. I mean, how quickly could they scale? Are they scaling? Of course they are. I don't know. I can't pretend to tell you. I do think that most of the new things will be tied to cross-boundary line, business model oriented. And that's the one thing, because the technology is very accessible and very low cost and very efficient. But then again, amazing things going on in storage. Amazing things going on in storage. And then I hear about new networking things. And then, gee, the guys at Stanford building the OpenFlow thing and selling it to Nicera. There's always someone thinking about doing the same kinds of things differently. And so, and again, microprocessors. These guys in the UK doing things with plastics now. It's fascinating stuff. So what does that mean for the next generation of microprocessors? People said, can you build ARM we've known about for a long time, and Herman Hauser and the crew that built all that are brilliant people. They go back to some of the old stuff that I was working on. And yet, the guys who said it was impossible to do plastics-based stuff are the ones who invented it. So I don't know that you can say that all these areas are taken yet. They're certainly big businesses, but if you look at the life cycle of a quote-unquote Fortune 500 company over time, it just keeps collapsing. So I don't know.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Since you called yourself the distribution guy, I'm just wondering, there's innovation in microprocessors and hardware and all that stuff. What's getting you excited about companies or technologies that are creating new markets and new distribution channels where maybe people just hadn't thought about it or hadn't invented that type of distribution or market before?
Mm-hmm. Well, the models are evolving, and the more I think the more we end up refining the security, privacy, data sovereignty, and presence issues on the network, I think that will open up new opportunities. I mean, the network does one thing really, really well, which is to remove distance, right? So the phone network did that too, but you couldn't move, you could pick up the phone and call the pet store, but you still got to ship the pet food in a truck to my house, right? So you can move a lot of goods around and commerce. So I think these new rules that will evolve as the nation states normalize the data sovereignty issues and the privacy and security issues, which is a big issue. So a lot of the innovation in the distribution and commerce models, I think will change as the regulatory regime normalizes. And that's inevitable. We're seeing, for example, the regulatory and intellectual property regime normalize around mobile devices now. That very same thing played out in the PC business in the early days. Most people don't recall that, but IBM had all the IP. They struck a deal with Apple. They took that as precedent. They went to Sun. They went to Compaq. They went to everybody, and they raised $1 billion over 10 years in licensing their IP to those guys because they had precedent with Apple. So that always normalizes. Sewing machines, it goes way, way back. There's lots of cases on how the IP regime. So regulatory data sovereignty issues, I think then they'll open up models for units of one and different kinds of commerce. And I think that will be fascinating. You may opt into things as opposed to, But
We'll do one final question.
yeah, one more, and I'll linger for a little bit.
What is your leadership style?
I just steal from others. I like I kind of said it earlier a little bit. I don't know if it was Ted Turner. Somebody made the point about lead follower, get out of the way. And, in some senses, the most overarching thing that I try to operate with is I think it's a Teddy Roosevelt quote about the difference between a boss and a leader. and it's that a boss bosses and works in a covert, and a leader works in the open and leads. And so I think you have to be open and transparent, and you have to be authentic as best as possible. And there are certain things that are confidential or whatever that you have to deal with, and whether they're you know, intellectual property issues or you know, personnel issues and things like that. But in general, I think you just have to look for the best idea and be open and have a framework for that kind of conversation. And then the other thing that I like about working with groups, I was typically ideally small groups, is to get a lot of ideas out early and often, but don't change your plan until it's time to change the plan. And that's Dave House, if anybody knows Dave House from Intel, sort of like in the house rules, it's like make the best possible decision at the last moment in time, because then you have the most amount of information at your fingertips. And so the idea of stimulating ideas on a regular rhythm drives some people crazy when you want to have those kinds of sessions, because they're looking for closure, because some people always want to know, what am I going to go do, what am I going to go do, as opposed to, what have we learned, what have we learned, what have we learned? And then when you reach a certain moment in time, you've got an accumulated community with common interests. The whole planning process of sharing that stuff is to get a common understanding, so that when you do move forward, you're moving forward in unison and everybody's in the same lockstep. And we did a lot of that at Apple. Steve was very, very big on those kinds of things. I learned a lot of operating principle from that. And so I tend to think it's about being in the open, having best ideas and smartest people in the room, and you don't have to be that person. But if you're facilitating it and you're working in the open and you're authentic, people hopefully want to follow you. Right?
Let's give Daniel another big round of applause.
All right, great. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much.